to be able to practice this meditation, which is allowing yourself to rest as the awareness, which is your natural state, which is your true nature, right? To practice resting as awareness for brief moments as often as possible under all circumstances. That's the final practice. To practice formal meditation is not under all circumstances, it's under controlled conditions, right? If you get good enough at it under controlled conditions that you can maintain attention on your true nature, for longer periods of time, right? Then you're ready to go into the in your life practice, which means now you're going to practice under all circumstances, while you're driving your car, while you're talking to people, while you're on the toilet, when you're having sex, while you're eating food, while you're watching TV. Under all those circumstances, you can experience resting as awareness and experience being above everything that's happening. And that experience of being above everything that's happening, unformed, right? That awareness is unformed, right? That experience is inherently satisfying. When you experience that, you begin to experience a subtle shift, and the subtle shift feels like a relief. Feels like a relief. When I sat down to meditate this morning, the voice in my head had already been on the job for a while, talking about what's going to happen today, what I like, what I don't like, what I should worry about, all the other bullshit that the voice talks about in anybody's head, right? But then I sat down and did my meditation practice, came to stillness and silence, moved my attention away from that activity, and it wasn't long before I experienced a shift away from that and a shift to my natural state, my true nature, and it was like flushing the toilet. It was like rebooting the computer, right? All that mishigas that started to run, right, just dissolved, dissipated and dissolved, right? And by the time I got done with the practice, there was a fresh experience, like rebooting the system type of thing, right? And so during the day, if you're practicing the informal practice of resting as awareness as many times as possible, you're rebooting your head that many times a day, clearing your head, clearing the shit out, that many times a day, so you can get more of a consistent experience of what it's like to be the awareness instead of being the form of the personality. And if you do that consistently enough over time, right, it will become obvious. The awareness that you were not attending to, if you attend to it consistently in time during all situations, it will eventually become obvious, and I don't have to rest as it anymore. I can experience being that as a ground of being in the world. As I move through my life, I don't lose contact with my true nature. And when that happens, right, your life is transformed. When that happens, you're happy, satisfied, complete, and peaceful, right? Regardless of the situation that's occurring in your life, regardless. And so you have found the mother lode. You have found that the happiness that most human beings are seeking, that they will never find, right, is something that they all have that they don't know they have. And when you discover that you have it, right, then what you want to do is continue to do the practices that will allow you, right, to recognize that when the personality's in play, it's in play, right? And so you don't get lost in it. You don't identify with it anymore. When the personality's when you're thinking, you're thinking. Before you're awake, thinking happens and you identify 100% with it and you think you're the thinker of the thoughts. That's the road to hell, right? So when you wake up, you realize that, no, I am not the thinker of the thoughts. The thought activity is coming from my conditioning. It's about survival. It's not interested in well-being. It can't produce well-being. And if I want to experience well-being, I have to move attention away from that and relax, and then discover that well-being has been here all along. That's what this meditation practice is all about. It's about waking up. And if you begin to understand it, you know what I mean? If you begin to catch on, you realize there isn't anything more important than this. Because if you're living your life and you get up every day and you're working to experience happiness through making money, through relationships and all that, and then you discover this, you realize that you don't need to go through all that. You know, you can be happy right now. No matter what's going on, you can be happy right now. That doesn't mean you won't do those things, you know, but now you're not doing them to get anything. You're doing them just to celebrate life, just to celebrate the experience of playing, just to be playful, to experience life. And there is nothing that's available in this world that you should deny yourself. If you have the ability to be rich, fine, be rich, enjoy it. You can really enjoy being rich when you don't think it's necessary for you to be happy. Then you can enjoy it, because you know that if it's here or not here, it's not going to change your experience of well-being. One of my colleagues, who is an expert in ontological teaching and practice, ontology is the technology of being, the study of being. And he made this statement, he's a psychologist, he made this statement. I thought it was an interesting and useful statement to consider. And what he said is, there are three great mysteries. One of them is air to the birds, another is water to fish, and the other great mystery is humans to themselves. I wonder how many human beings are aware of the fact that they're a mystery. Most human beings, I think, are living inside a mental state in which the concepts that are involved in this mental state are taken to be true, isn't it? These concepts involved in this mental state, the concept that you are a physical body, the concept that you are a personality, and they're not even necessarily seen as concepts, right? Because the idea of being a body, a physical body, occurred so early on in our life, right, that we don't rethink that. We don't keep rethinking I'm a physical body. Now it's taken just to be true. It's just taken to be true. Right? So you're operating inside the belief now. And you're operating inside the mental state now. So human beings are similar to the bird compared to air and the fish compared to water, in the sense that human beings are experiencing being in the experience of being without having any more recognition of it than the fish or the bird. Human beings are experiencing being what they are, right? They're experiencing being what they are all the time without the recognition of it. Right? So that's just like the bird to the air and the fish to the water, right? They don't recognize the air, they don't recognize the water, right? Because it's a constant. It's a constant. There's no absence of it to distinguish it. There's no absence of it to distinguish it. The same thing is true with being a human being, you know, that the experience we're having of our existence, the experience we're having, see, most people never entertain the idea that they're experiencing an existence, right? Most people don't entertain the idea that I'm experiencing an existence. No. What people have it is, I'm experiencing a personality. I'm experiencing an entity. I'm experiencing an identity that I call me. I'm experiencing an identity that has a name. It's located here in this physical body. It has a story that's unique, right? And it has a place in the world, right? It has a story, it has a place in the world. It belongs to a family, right? Belongs to a society, right? It's learned how to live in time and space. It's learned how to play this game by the rules, right? But with all of that, within that system of belief that people live their life in, right? There is no real, authentic sense of well-being. There is no real sense of satisfaction. There's no real sense of well-being. How can there be when you're experiencing yourself to be something that's not real, and that something that's not real has characteristics that you attribute to it, right? And that something that's not real finds itself separate from life, separate from the rest of the world, and finds itself in a position to try and navigate its way through this, try and navigate its way through life with all the threats, all the barriers, all the obstacles, right? All the things that have to be achieved, all the things that have to be gone through. And so that's experienced as a burden. It's experienced as a concern. It's experienced as stress. It's experienced as something that people get caught up in thinking about, attributing meaning to, having feelings about, trying to figure out, trying to learn more about, trying to figure out a way to get what I want, trying to figure out a way to get what I want. And maybe, and for a lot of people, they probably don't even have a clear answer to the question, what do I want? That's an important question, isn't it? Don't you think if you're going to be on this planet for a brief period of time that you should have some idea of what you want, you know, what you're doing here, like that? So these are existential questions. These are ontological questions that people, generally speaking, the masses don't entertain. They don't entertain them. Generally speaking, in our contemporary society, back in the 70s when I was a young man, we were in the humanistic movement during that time. You know, Gestalt psychology, person-centered psychology, Carl Rogers, Maslow, you know, psychedelics were on the scene, you know, and Eastern beliefs, Eastern teachings and beliefs and practices were being spoken about by Alan Watts. You know, Krishnamurti was getting popular, you know, Zen was getting famous and popular and so forth, right? And people would pay a lot of money to go do an intensive training, right, in which they were presented in the training the fact that they exist. They pay a lot of money for that. To go to a training where in the training they say you exist. And what they meant by that is that you don't exist as a physical body or you don't exist as a personality. You exist as an awareness itself. People pay a lot of money to have somebody point that out, right? And then share with them, you know, what the value is of knowing what you are. You know, what is the value of knowing what you are? What is the value of knowing what is going on, you know, that we call life, or the circumstances that are occurring? What's happening? What is the value of that? Really what it boils down to is what is the value of discovering a possibility that has a direct impact on the way you relate to your existence? What is the value of discovering a possibility that has a direct impact on the way you relate to what's happening in your life, the way you relate to yourself, the way you relate to your body, the way you relate to other people, the way you relate to death, the way you relate to sickness, the way you relate to money? I mean, when you start to consider that, it starts to reveal itself in terms of the value of understanding how I relate to all these things, right? But how are you going to answer the question, how do I relate to these things, until you answer the question, what am I? Or who am I? You got to have a place from which to talk about the existence that you are as it relates to life, as it relates to other people, as it relates to what's happening. Right? How many people engage in that inquiry? How many people engage with that? Most people never even consider the possibility that that inquiry exists or that inquiry has value. And yet without that inquiry, you are no more than an automaton. Without that inquiry, you're no more than a machine that's been programmed, that's been wound up at birth and unwinds for a number of years until it runs out of energy and drops. That's basically what a human life is. It's predictable. You know, one of the reasons that we know it's mechanical and automatic is that a psychologist that's been trained in analyzing human behavior, right, can sit down and have a conversation with somebody and predict pretty accurately what they're going to do. And the reason they can do that is because human beings' behavior is patterns. Human beings behave in patterns. Human beings behave in patterns. Their patterns are directly related to their early life experiences, and those patterns repeat themselves. So if we know this, all I have to do is talk to you and ask you about your childhood, observe your behavior as you're speaking to me, right? Get a sense of who you think you are, right? Get a sense of how you view the world, and I can pretty much accurately predict what you're going to do. I used to work in the prison system, and I had to do psychological evaluations on inmates. And I worked in a maximum security prison, right? So I had to do psychological evaluations on inmates to determine whether or not they were safe to be freed back into the community. And this was a maximum security prison, so there were people in this prison had all the murderers, right? All the people that did heinous crimes, all the people that were serial killers, all the mafia, all the black militants, all the addictive people that did crimes, right? This was the worst of the worst in this prison, maximum security prison. And so part of my job was to evaluate these people when they were going to go before the parole board and give a recommendation to the parole board, right? They have to understand something. Parole boards in the state that I was in, and I'm sure it's generally true, are appointed politically. So if you're friends with a politician, you can be appointed to sit on the parole board. You have no qualifications other than that. You're just a regular person, and you're going to sit on the parole board with a group of other people, none of whom has any qualifications for human behavior. And you're going to interview inmates who have committed heinous crimes and determine whether to free them again. And so that's how much they depended on the psych eval, right? Because they figured, what do we know, right? We have to really hope that the psychologist gets it right? Because we're going to follow their recommendations, right? Well, but my job as a psychologist was relatively easy, especially for people in that prison, because almost all of them, I never found an inmate that was in prison for murder or serious heinous crimes that didn't have a nightmare of a childhood. I never saw one. I never saw one. So again and again and again, when I would interview the inmate, I would have their record in front of me, right? First of all, they had a pattern of being in prison and incarceration going back to their teenage years, almost all the time. And then if you looked at their early life experiences, most of the time they were seriously neglected or abused, right? And then they have been in prison and repeated these patterns of behavior. They have very little insight, very little judgment, and very little appropriate judgment and controls, right? So you don't even have to be a psychologist. If you looked at all that information, you would come up with the same conclusion I did. The biggest predictor of the future is the past. Not only for these people, but for all of us, really, right? Because you're living your life from the past. The biggest predictor of the future is the past. How do you determine what to say and do right now? Past experience, right? So if you understand that, you realize you can never get out of your patterns. They'll just keep repeating, you know? You may not see that they're repeating because they reorganize into different forms, but it's the same basic shit. It's the same basic stuff, right? So the only way you can get out of your behavior being a function of the past is to wake up and be aware of that in real time and be able to see what's going on now without misinterpreting it, and be able to respond to that from a place other than your personality, which is a past-based operation. You know, I spent 30 years working with this population, and when I was doing psych evals, and most of the times I would say that the probability for successful parole is negative. The probability for, based on the past, that's what I have to say. I have nothing else to go by. What am I going to do? Just roll dice or something, yeah, right? Sure. But when I started to work with inmates in the prison using ontological material, using material to help them wake up and see who they really are, wake up and see what happened that caused them to behave the way they did, right? Then I saw inmates change dramatically. In the prison, not even before they were released. In the prison, they would change dramatically, right? And stop being the person that they were being in the prison. I saw it over and over again. It was very clear to me that if somebody wakes up and experiences their true nature, right, they can accurately predict the future for themselves. They could accurately create a future. See, if you're a personality and your personality is a past-based operation, right, you can't predict the future successfully because you're only going to repeat the patterns from the past. But if you see who you really are and you know that you can be awake and watch patterns play from the past and not act them out, now you have the freedom to say who you're going to be. You can create yourself. You can say who you are. You can say what's going to happen in the future, and you can act consistent enough with what's going to happen in the future to make it appear. It's transformation. Transformation is the word that describes it, because transformation, transform. You're changing your form from a content to a context. The personality is a content form. You are the personality. You are that thing, the personality, content. You're being a thing called the personality in the physical body, right? When you wake up to your true nature, you're no longer a thing, you're no thing. And that no thing, which is awareness, is a context. It's not a content. It's not a thing. It's a context. And a context determines how things occur, doesn't it? Yeah. That's one of the things one of my teachers used to say. Context is decisive. That's a true statement. Context is decisive. Why? Because the context determines the content. The context determines how things occur to you. If I'm experiencing myself as awareness, the way things occur to me is dramatically different than the way things occur to me when I am being a thing called the physical body and a personality. It is a shift from content to context. This is really critical to understand. You know, what is the context of your relationship, you see? Love is a context, is it not? Yeah. Not romantic love, that's not a context, that's a condition. Right? But in personal love, unconditional love is a context, right? The context could be called affinity. I experience an affinity with everything that exists. That's a context. So how things occur to me, right, is now being profoundly affected by the fact that I'm seeing things as a context. If I'm seeing things as a content, then the way I see things is how do they relate to me as a physical body and a personality? That's how I'm relating to everything from a content, from a thing, from a personal story, from a personality, from a pattern of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are designed to have me survive, to have me be in control, to have me be in charge, to have me be successful and win. That's the game of life. And you can be as miserable as all get out while you're playing that game, right? But you keep playing the game because the idea is that that your success, your well-being is in the future, isn't it? Everybody's life is being lived with their well-being and their success in the future.